begin, I want to take a moment and thank you all for joining us and for submitting your questions both prior to and during this session. I expect tonight to bring about thoughtful and engaging discussions, and I want to remind you that we want to hear from you. So please have your questions ready when the time comes. At this time, I am pleased to introduce the Minister of Education, the Honorable Dale Rabane, JP MP. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Bergman, and good evening, and welcome everyone who has joined us on this call for this very important topic. We are here today, and we're going to be talking about the proposals that have been put forth for parish primary schools. As I've stated on many occasions, the proposal that we're talking about tonight is just that, a proposal. This consultation process will be open, it will be transparent, and it will be fair. We will listen and we will welcome your feedback and suggestions to help guide the final decisions that will be made. During this meeting, you will hear people speak and lay out the proposal and giving rationale for it. And as I said, we will be listening for your feedback. I have to repeat, and you'll hear me repeat this not only just now, but throughout the night, that this is just a proposal. The conversation that we're talking about may lead to alternatives to this proposal, but we have to sit and listen, and we will take down every single comment that is sent our way before a final decision will be made. Tonight is that opportunity for you to listen and to ask questions. It's our hope that tonight we can present a vision for our primary schools that you will be able to see, understand, and ask questions about any concerns that you may have. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what you have to say and what you think we should be doing differently. But here's what we do know. Our children deserve the best public education can offer. They deserve the best in 21st century learning, 21st century teaching, 21st century facilities, and 21st century technology. The time has come for us to be bold, be brave, to make those necessary changes to bring about the real reform that we've been talking about for many, many years, but never quite made that step or that leap towards. Our aim is true reform that will bring about a new and better approach of learning in our public schools. It's critical for all of us to have an open mind and look at these proposed changes, not through the lens of being influenced by what we did when we were in school. Because all of us fondly remember the good things and the bad things about what we were in school. But today's students are unique. Today's environment is unique. While some things about education will never change, there are other things that must, should, and have to change. It's also key that you please understand this next part of the comments that I want to say. While we're here to discuss the proposal for parish primary schools, you must always remember and view this from the perspective of overall education reform. The proposal to introduce parish primary schools is only one of several things that are happening to make our public education system the best system it can be. We're working on three other pillars of education reform. That is the development of an education authority to oversee the governance of our school system, the implementation of the Learning First program to provide an avenue for improved delivery of education and professional development of our teachers, and of course, the phasing out of middle schools and the introduction of signature schools. When this government was elected, we were very specific that education is a key priority. It's a mandate that was given to us by the public, and we will continue to work diligently to make sure that public education is the best it could be for our current and future students. But in order for us to do that, we have to be prepared. We have to be prepared to discuss proposals such as the one we're going to talk about tonight. A proposal that might see the closure of some beloved schools that have proud and long histories that we have to work to celebrate and preserve. Already from the feedback we've received from the nearly 12 or 13 meetings that we've had so far, it is crystal clear that a better mechanism for recording the historical narratives and legacies of our primary schools and all of our schools for that fact is needed. The youngest school in our system, in our primary school system, is 46 years old. The oldest is over 100. There are long and storied histories about all of our schools that need to be preserved and celebrated, regardless of what the final outcome will be from these consultation documents and this proposal. Another important part about education reform is that we are approaching this reform very deliberate and meaningful. It is necessary to ensure that we do this right. We do this with purpose, and we do this with all stakeholders moving in the same direction. We are not at the point where we can give drop dead dates on when things will happen, or when we will make the decisions, and then when schools, if that is the decision, will close. But we are committed to having those conversations in the future, because once we get through the portions that we're talking about now, those will answer the questions that will lead to more questions to get us to the point where we are finally able to sit down and say, okay, let's start mapping out the master plan of how we transition from where we are to where we go, because now we know where we need to be. And when it's time for that to start, there will be engagement, and the public will not be left behind and find out about what we're doing just overnight. We commit to our students, our staff, our families, and the broader community that there will always be appropriate notice and support for any changes that may occur when we come up with this detailed transition plan. As the commissioner will explain, we've developed a series of proposals for reshaping the school system, proposals that we can invest in and create the learning environments that will support each and every one of our young persons in reaching their highest potential. Learning environments that will support the teaching, the learning, and the curriculum that will help our children develop the skills, knowledge, values, and relationships so they can survive and thrive for decades to come. Your comments, your ideas are vital to help us make the best possible decisions in creating a world-class education here in Bermuda. So thank you for coming out tonight. And I look forward to able to answer your questions. I look forward to you seeing the presentation. And I look forward to us moving education forward together. Thank you. And back to you, Mr. Brangman.
Thank you very much, Minister. At this time, I'm going to start going over the purpose of the meeting. So number one is to explain the proposals. Number two, listen and respond to all questions. Number three, obtain feedback, suggestions, and alternatives before any decisions are made. Now for consistency, we're going to go through the program and ground rules. So we like that you keep cameras on at all times, display your full name, place your comments in the chat throughout the meeting. Don't hesitate, share as much as you can. It would only make this process that much more engaging and fulfilling for all involved. And lastly, submit any questions using our interactive presentation tool, Menti. Now, what you can expect: a two-part presentation by the Commissioner of Education, 2 Q&A sessions, education officials on hand to respond to questions, and may I add, experts in education as well, and polls to capture sentiments. At this point, I'd like to introduce the Commissioner of Education, Ms. Kalmar Richards, who will begin the first half of the presentation. Ms. Richards?
Thank you so much, Mr. Brangman. Good evening, everyone. This evening, we want to share with you that we must improve public education for our students. And we need you to join us in this effort because we all have a responsibility to make our schools better. We must do better for our children by redesigning the public education system so that no matter what school a child attends, he or she experiences success as a student and ultimately as an adult. We have developed a proposal for how we can make our primary schools better. I will be sharing with you this evening about the proposals to introduce parish primary schools. If the proposals are accepted, it will require us to work together, to be prepared to make tough decisions, and to make the much needed change based on what is best for all of our children. Legislation will be introduced to change our system from a three-tier to a two-tier system as part of education reform. That legislation will result in 2 years added to the primary level and 1 year added to the senior level. We will expand the curriculum offerings in our primary schools so that they will come on par with curriculum offerings at the best schools around the world. And we will do that for our children. We know that teaching and learning are at the heart of education. And we have a very powerful and compelling vision for learning to share with you this evening. One that is personalized and based on the gifts and the talents and the passions and the interests of children. We cannot achieve the vision for learning without renovating and refurbishing our existing buildings. Our current buildings are not able to accommodate the increase in students and staff, the expanded curriculum offerings, and the type of teaching and learning experiences for our children, the experiences that they need and deserve. So we will also propose fewer primary schools, one per parish with 2 in Pembroke, to ensure equity and better utilization of our resources. This evening, I will also share with you our vision for parish primary schools, what parents and the surrounding community can do to help schools to become better. I will also share the factors that we considered to determine the 10 school locations which can be developed to achieve the vision for learning for our children. I'm so excited about what the proposed changes would bring for education for our children and how these changes can have a positive impact on their future and also future generations. Our children deserve the best that we can give to them. We really have to come together to make our schools the best for our children. The first part of the presentation that I will share with you this evening will address the reasons for change. Why are we changing? Then Dr. Simmons will share with you our vision for learning moving forward. And he will also walk you through some of the potential and possibilities for what learning spaces will look like. I will then share a bit about the legislation that will be introduced and how it will improve the structure of the Bermuda Public School System. I will then take a few moments to help you to understand the concept of the parish primary school and end the first part of the presentation by sharing the reasons why we think that we need fewer primary schools. So let's start with the question, why do we need to transform education for our students? Some people believe that things are okay as they are. We certainly believe that we need to transform and change. In fact, we know that we need to do so for our children. What we know and believe is that our children are extremely capable, they are brilliant, they are talented, but that's not reflected in our results. We are finding that not all of our children are excelling, and we want all children to excel and to be successful. We are continuously receiving concerns and complaints about the services and programs offered in our schools, that they are either insufficient or they're lacking, and or what is offered is not offered with enough frequency. We really want to be able to meet the needs of each and every child, and we are not positioned to do that as present. When we consider the academic results overall for the system, we know that we must improve. When our students' results are compared to those of their peers locally and internationally, our students are lagging and they are behind. We have to prepare our children to compete locally and globally now, but also for their futures. And when we consider the powerful vision for learning that we want to execute moving forward, we recognize that our buildings are just too old to accommodate what we want for our children moving forward. Plan 2022 steps out a very serious statement in terms of what the parents and community want. And that statement simply says that they are demanding a transformed education system. And we're responding to those demands. We know that the world has changed and we need to change with it. And we also recognize that there are a notable number of individuals in the community who do not have, who have a lack of confidence in public education. And we want to change that. We need to change. We do need to transform education for our children. I'm going to invite Dr. Simmons to share with you at this point, starting with a powerful vision for learning for Bermuda's children.
Good night, everyone, and thank you, Mrs. Richards. As Mrs. Richards just shared, it's a powerful vision for learning, and I'm very consistent in the presentation because it's a vision for learning that we're very confident with. And as you see before you in the chart, in this chart, you see what some will refer to as 21st century competencies. Some may call it dimensions, but we refer to it more as competencies. And with this particular vision for learning, what is probably at the forefront for 21st century learning, you will hear so much more about this, that our children must have a personalized learning experience. It must be flexible. Certainly, it must be inspiring and engaging, and certainly is a future focus to the vision for learning. It must be adaptive. Certainly must empower our children. And as you see there, where it talks about culturally connected and then relevant, those are two dominant themes or competencies that have come up as we have been on this journey engaging the public about what they want for our children. Consistently, people have been asking and speaking to, they want a culturally relevant curriculum. If they want a culturally relevant curriculum, it has many of these competencies as features in the curriculum. An entrepreneurial type of competency is very much a part of a 21st century education experience. And as we go through the chart in a few minutes, I'm going to share with you some of the vision and the models that we've been talking about, starting with the first one. When we look at our classrooms, we want our children to have a 21st century learning experience, teaching and learning experience that takes them outside the classroom. And while many of our children have somewhat of a comparable experience to this, even now, you may go to schools and you may see some of the depiction that you see there at schools. Many of our schools have garden beds in one form or the other. May not be that structure. Some use tires, some use barrels. They're very creative. Some schools are ahead of the game because they're already doing some form of virtual gardening, for example. But with this experience in the classroom or outdoor classroom, we are challenging and will be challenging. Where 40% at minimum of our children's learning experience should be outdoors. And this also implies maximizing and using what 21 Square Mile Island has to offer our children. All of our children and our teachers must be engaged, must be inspired, must look to be innovative with the maximum of 21 Square Mile Island, but also be courageous to do what? To go beyond 21 Square Mile Island. And I'm sure there are persons who are here that are listening to some of this here. You know, you've already experienced what it means to travel 25 miles, 18 miles off the island of Bermuda. And I mean, I don't mean cruising to New York. I mean, you know what it's like to go to Sargasso Sea. You know what it's like to go through the boundaries of Bermuda of the Blue Halo. These are the type of experiences that our children deserve. And even if they have fear of the ocean, Their learning experience is an engaging learning experience that uses the technology. So the virtual is very much a part of their outdoor, indoor teaching and learning experience. To add to this here, they will have what we call a multi-purpose room. And in this multi-purpose room, you will see evidence of children and teachers and their parents engage in an interactive, cooperative learning environment. This is where children and parents and adults, especially the adults, you get on the level of your children. Let's get on their level. Let's get down on the floor and be engaging with children and have a beginner's mind. You know, a beginner's mind where they're discovering, you know, their own interests at this very early developmental stage of their teaching and learning experience. From there, we go to the lower primary classroom. Well, this is where it's going through an evolution. This isn't a classroom that you see now. There aren't the row by row desks and chairs of the traditional, what I consider to be the sterile traditional classroom. No, this is more interactive. Round tables, and again, children get to engage in their space, using the maximum that a room has to offer for their engagement. The furniture reflects that. It's comfortable, it's engaging, it invites each other, you know, to share and be cooperative and collaborative with each other. That's what the lower primary classroom is about with our children. It's designed developmentally for those age groups. An exciting room that we have is the art room. And while all may say that not all of our children are artists, all of our children have some illustrative skill, we may say. I'm sure there are people in this listening audience who are certainly gifted artists. But all of our children should have the experience of what it means to create something artistically. Because while they may do it the traditional way with the painting, the brushes, the crayons, the whatever pencils they may use, this is an opportunity where our children will also get to use those mobile devices. We've had a learning experience in one or two of our schools where students have had the experience in an art classroom where they have demonstrated using a mobile device to do something graphically. That's what we want our children to do in the art classroom. This is where creation comes alive. From this creative art room, they go to and will have access to the amphitheater. We don't want our children just having something on display without articulating what is it about. All of our children must be and should be put in a position to express their gifts, whether it is the illustrative, the performing arts, public speaking, all of that. This is what the amphitheater affords our children and our teachers. So this is not a sit-down room solely. This is where our children get to demonstrate what they can do in terms of what they create or what they produce in the amphitheater. When we look at the upper primary school classroom, for example, well, in the upper primary school classroom, I often, and I like to say this here, this is not a sit-down classroom for sit-down teachers. This requires the teacher to be interactively engaging and mobile with children, because we're not looking for our children to be just sit-down children. We want them engaging in a classroom management where they understand the respect of space and time. Those are the things we want to coach our children with and about. And this is the type of classroom that does that. When you talk about the boards that are there, these aren't boards just for what the teacher wants to depict. These are interactive. And if you see that map, that Bermuda map, that should be an interactive experience with our children, where they put their hands on it and begin to see how that map comes apart in relationship to those parishes, and they understand the meaning of those parishes, where the names came from, what is the relationship to their own residencies in Bermuda. Those are the type of learning experience that come alive in a classroom like this here. It is going to be cooperative, collaborative. And this is where also the personal begins to really take shape. Children at this age begin to have an idea of what they're truly interested in. You begin to see some of those things that children grab and attach themselves to. And this is where the teacher, who serves not just as a teacher, but serves as a coach, observes that and begins to pull it out of our children. That's what we want. The next room is the ideal room for pulling it out of our children, because we want our children to be producers. In the maker's room, some call it the maker's room in the 3D studio. There are other places they may refer to it and build upon it as a fabrication laboratory. Or some as the production room, but that's exactly, whether it's a fabrication laboratory or the maker's room, our children will be expected to produce something in their learning. And you will hear the term in terms of project-based learning, implying that our children in this project-based learning produce something. They may produce something as individuals, they may produce something even as a team, as a collaborative group, just like we spend and put our time in producing floats. Some schools do, some schools don't. My position is that every school should be expected to produce a collaborative float that comes from their school, where children get to understand the principles of science, technology, engineering, the arts, and mathematics. That's what comes alive in a 3D studio, using the electronic devices and using everyday carpentry, metalwork, electric devices. The maker's room, production room, that's what we want for our children. And of course, what is school without an outdoor recreational space? This doesn't mean we don't have any gymnasiums that are up to par. We will. But we want playground space for our children, that invites the opportunity for them to have these interactive, adventuresome types of play spaces, where they're not just climbing the ladders in the assembly hall or the ropes. Those may be apparatus that are no longer used because they may have the climbing wall. We must challenge our children to step outside of their comfort zone, to experience these types of learning activities as a part of their day-to-day teaching and learning. And so, as we go through this experience, let me say this here. It's going to be important that our children come to know and love Bermuda. When we talk about what our values are in this here, we want our children to believe in Bermuda and understand what matters to our country. If they are to do that there, they must be proud to be Bermudians and be unapologetic about what that means as they understand Bermuda's place and their place in relationship to the world. I hope this gives you somewhat of a snapshot, because that's what it is, but we're going to build onto it and build this kaleidoscope, this mural, this greater, grander vision of what we know and believe is deserving for our children. We welcome your questions at the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Simmons. And I think what I would underscore as we prepare to move to the next few slides is, we are really looking at preparing children for their future. And we cannot prepare them for their future in buildings and with the current learning spaces that were built for an education system and jobs of the past. So we are future focused as we look at transforming education for our children. What I'd like to do now is share with you the concept of the Parish Primary School. Dr. Simmons talked about the importance of children going outside of the walls of the classroom where they can actually apply their learning or see their learning in action, making the learning real, making it relevant for them. And so as we consider the concept of a parish primary school, it aligns with the vision for learning for our children. Imagine for a moment the school as the hub of the parish, and every individual in that parish, in the neighborhoods, surrounding neighborhoods, all of the businesses and organizations and community services in the parish are working together to channel their energy and efforts into helping that school to be successful and to be the best, where the community partners come together and they are augmenting the learning experiences and the programs. Now, some may say, well, that happens now. And I would say that it happens now once in a while. What we are looking for is to set up an infrastructure that will bring the community partners into the daily operations of the school and the daily learning experiences of our children, where they would be involved in all that is going on as much as possible. They would be providing, sharing their professional expertise and their resources and services with teachers, with students, but also with parents as well. So our model includes that. And the communities would take ownership for the success of their children. They would invest, they would commit to, they would just give their very best efforts to helping every child in the school, in their parish, to be successful. We don't have that now, but we want to move to a vision where everyone rallies to help the school to be successful. The research is very clear that in order for students to really be prepared for the 21st century, they really must engage with and be connected with their surroundings. They must have opportunities to go outside of the gates of the school and to interact with their environment. And that is part of what we are promoting and what we are looking to do for our children moving forward. Additionally, schools have to prepare children for so much. They are focusing on the academics. They're helping them to become problem solvers and critical thinkers. They have to help young people to develop their information and media literacy skills. They are teaching children how to navigate the external environment, how to be civically responsible, and all sorts of other lifelong skills. Schools can't do that alone. It takes a parish, and the vision moving forward is for schools to become the hub of their parish, with the community rallying around and helping schools to be successful. I want to share that legislative changes will be brought forward, and those changes will shift and change the structure of our schools. Legislation will be brought forward that will include the phasing out of middle schools. The legislation will introduce senior level signature schools, and these will be schools with pathways. And when I think about the possibilities for our senior students, I am just very excited for them and what will be offered. The legislation will also establish a signature school for children with exceptionalities, and we have in mind here our students who are currently at Dane. The legislation will establish an alternative education signature school for children, and which will cater to students who require having their needs met around social emotional needs and their behavioral needs, and also other alternative needs. And the schools for exceptionalities and alternative education will cater to children from across the island. The legislation will also change the system from a 3-tier, primary, middle, senior, to a 2-tier system, primary and senior signature. And as a result, the primary schools will go from primary 1 to primary 8. And the vision is to also have a primary school either on site or attached to or in the actual building of the primary school, so that when a student enters preschool, the next time the student makes the transition, it is to the senior signature school. As we reduce the amount of transitions, we increase the opportunities for success. As we bring in the legislation to introduce the signature schools, and along with the changes in the primary schools, we believe and we're very confident that we will increase the success of our children, along with the other factors that go along with this, the vision for learning and additional things that will happen with curriculum and assessment for our young people. We also believe that we need fewer primary schools. There are trend data indicating that there is a decrease in the number of children enrolling in our schools. There's also a decline in the birth rate. And the projections are that those trends, both of those trends, will continue. You heard us talk about this very powerful vision for learning, which will be personalized and which will need to take place in learning 21st century learning spaces, which do not currently exist in our schools. And so our schools are old and they cannot support this vision. We need equity across all of our primary schools. We want to ensure that children get what they need. We want to be able to take our resources and to use them based on what each school needs, based on the demographics of each school. And we want to be able to better distribute and utilize our resources. With the resources that we're allocated and we're presently spreading across 18 schools, we want to take those resources and spread them across 10 schools. And we believe that in doing so, we will help those schools to become successful and our children will achieve more. So we believe that we need fewer primary schools as we move forward. Mr. Brangman, I'm going to turn it to you so that our participants have an opportunity to ask some questions.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Participants, I just want to remind everyone involved that in addition to submitting your questions through Facebook and on Zoom, you can also call in your questions or comments. The number to call is 478-3301. And you can also visit www.menti.com. That's MENTI.com, and put in the code 4311452 to submit your questions there. And again, that information is right on the screen there. So I will open this Q&A session with the following question. What comments do you have on the proposals to introduce parish primary schools with one primary school per parish and 2 in Pembroke Parish? So let's see what questions we have thus far. All right, first question. What happens when the parish school does not have enough classroom space for the additional students?
Mr. Brangman, we want to thank the participant for that question. And if I can reference page 28, which actually steps out some of the projections for the numbers for each parish, we've actually taken those into consideration. The projections go up to the year 2027. And when one considers the data, what we are proposing in terms of schools holding up to 300 students will accommodate the number of projected students. I would also want our participants to know that we are looking at a teacher-student ratio of 1:15. So based on the data and based on what we're considering for our primary schools in terms of enrollment numbers, we will be able to accommodate our students in our schools.
Thank you, Commissioner. I want to remind the public, those listening as well, that we have the experts on this panel here. So if you have any questions at all, now is the best time to ask them to get immediate responses. So again, I encourage you to submit your questions through the aforementioned ways, and we will do our best to address them all. So the next question I have is, I would like to hear discussion about the particular teaching and learning failures of the 3-tier system that are addressed with the shifting to a 2-tier system, and in particular, the organizational culture, and its impact on change. Please address the general challenges of change, in particular, the change-oriented mindset.
I'll take that question. There's a lot packed into that statement and question. But let's begin with the mindset change. Because when you reflect upon the vision for learning that we just outlined, and some of the statements that Mrs. Richards has made in terms of what we're looking for structurally and in parish schools, that in itself requires a change mindset, starting there. We talk about in the statement, if I'm understanding clearly, in terms of the general challenges of change, when we look at our organizational culture, the general shift and challenge that we have in change in the classroom is going to be probably the change in terms of people's pedagogy. In other words, how they teach. As you see with even the designs of classrooms, environment does shape behavior. Environment, and you can tell by the vision for learning that we just outlined, the classroom environment in itself is a change to what many teachers experience on a day-to-day basis. So being adaptive to that change, recognizing that the classroom environment induces a change for children that meets them where they are. And that's a change for many of our teachers who are more teacher-centered. This is more of a student-centered types of teaching and learning environment. When we say a personalized teaching and learning experience, that in itself is a change for many of our teachers. It is not to say that many of our teachers do not want our children to explore and experience and be exposed to their interest. Greater shift is going to be with our teachers adapting to a learner-centered, student-centered teaching and learning environment. And that's what the vision for learning outlines. It's a student-centered teaching and learning environment. The other part of the question, I've somewhat split it up. The question speaks to, I think you said the teaching and learning. Ms. Bregman, could you rephrase that? Say it again. Teaching and learning failures of three-tier system. Did I?
Yeah, so it says here, here discussion about the particular teaching and learning failures of the three-tier system that are addressed with the shifting to a two-tier system,
Right.
And in particular, the organizational culture.
Right. That particular question gets at teacher effectiveness. And when you're talking about teaching and learning failures of our three-tier system, shifting to a two-tier system, that's getting at and looking at, for example, how do we improve our student learning as measured by student gains? That's fundamental, but that's not the only measure of our teachers' effectiveness or, quote unquote, where our children's failures are. You know, they're not having gains. There are multiple variables that contribute to failures in the classroom. And a lot of it first starts with what is the quality of teaching? What is the quality of teaching? And I'm sure you will hear some more later in terms of part of this change process requires investment in professional development that prepares our teachers for the shift in their teaching. This isn't, I think the minister likes to say, this isn't a thing where you wake up one day, the next day and everything has changed to what you want it to be. No, this takes work. And just as it will take work for this overall transition, so shall it be with our teachers. But we're going to be there for each other to coach each other along in this process. So the professional development that we'll put in place and have in place to assist our teachers with concepts of project-based learning, for example. You heard me talking about the importance of our children understanding what it means to produce something. Well, for our children to understand what it means to produce something, teachers must have learning activities that talk about production. So all of these things contribute to the improvement of student learning and measured by student gains. And fundamentally, we have to improve what is the fundamentals, our children's reading levels. And on the evidence of this question, we can speak to even right now in a two-tier system as we transition and look to transition to a two-tier system, our language, our reading, our literacy, our numeracy, all of that must show student learning improvement. And the measure of that goes with their student gains and quality teaching. So you asked for a discussion. That's more of a lecture response to the statement in question, but it warrants a greater discussion going forward.
Thank you very much for that thorough response.
It's a good question and good statement.
Yes, most definitely. I just want to point out to all the participants that for your convenience, we've posted in the chat on Zoom and in the comments on Facebook the link to Menti. So you can click on that link and easily go to the page to sign in and submit your questions. So on to the next one. This is more of a comment, a suggestion rather. So this person says, I suggest agriculture, examples crop and animal rearing for food, conservation of the environment, agricultural land, historic buildings, and national monuments be included in our social curricula to protect and enhance our heritage and culture for future generations.
Mr. Brangman, that's quite exciting, and we thank the participant for sharing that. It fits in with the vision for learning that we have for our children being outside of the classroom. And I'd invite Dr. Simmons just to make a few brief comments in response to that recommendation as well.
I thank you very much. Ms. Richards knows that this is probably one of my more exciting subject matter as we talk about our vision for learning, because I'm a strong advocate that Bermuda's children need to have this type of experience. And it's such a fundamental experience for our children to be engaged in something where they watch something grow. And then what they grow, they understand that it has certainly a life-saving value as it has also a marketable value. And that's where the entrepreneurship comes in. Our children must understand that what you grow, you can provide and serve others with it. You can also sell it. So I'm excited about what the listener or the guest shared just now. That's the type of engaging partnership we want with the public as we engage in this new vision.
Dr. Simmons, while you were sharing as well, I was thinking about STEAM education, the science, technology, the engineering, the arts, as well as the agriculture and the mathematics. So creating those opportunities for our children on a daily basis.
That's correct.
Yeah, I just want to recognize and thank Susan Smith, who just submitted that she was the one that submitted that comment. Thank you for that. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Susan Smith.
And thank you so much.
Okay, so on to the next question. What future job opportunities will be available in the new school system?
Thank you, Mr. Brangman. Thank you for that question to the participant. What future job opportunities will be available in the system? So I think, what are we preparing children for? I think that's what the question is getting at. And when we consider, first of all, let's consider at the primary level, we are looking to expand the curriculum. Right now, our students have an opportunity to take their core courses, English, math, science, social studies, they take PE and and then they will have their elective courses. They will have their PE, their music, and they will have the art. But we want to expand the curriculum. Our students need to be able to compete with their peers internationally as well as locally. So looking to introduce the foreign languages, to look at introducing the vocational technical types of courses and having specialized rooms to do that, so that we can then prepare our children for the signature schools and the signature pathways that will be available for them to move along. And so we have a team right now who is engaging in research to determine what are the most appropriate and most meaningful and most relevant pathways that our children that can be offered to our children. So what I would want to reassure the participant who asked that question is that, first of all, we are using research, and that's important. We're not just going to be pulling ideas from anywhere. We will use the local research, but we will also use the international research, because we still have to be aware of the jobs of the future. And our senior signature schools will prepare our children for future jobs in Bermuda as well as on a global playing field. So I hope that helps answer the question for our participant.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'm sure it did. You did give a very thorough answer. I'd like to thank all the participants for submitting your questions. Much appreciated. We're going to head on to the next one now. So this reads, project-based learning creates and allows for many skills to be displayed. All students can produce with this learning. So more of a comment than a question.
And Dr. Simmons may want to just respond to that comment. It's actually, as he prepares to respond, it's in priority 1 for Plan 2022. It talks about, engaging our children in project-based learning, but I'll allow Dr. Simmons to add a bit more at this time. Unmute, Dr. Simmons.
It builds upon the previous statement and previous 2 statements, really. I mean, again, with that project-based learning, this is a key strategic priority. It's a key teaching and learning expectation, really. And I think that's the term that it's an expectation. It's going to be an expectation. It will be a measure of what students can do. And so, we welcome this as a part of the new vision for learning. It gets back to what we were saying earlier. Our children must be introduced in what it means to produce things, to create things. And our children do it, but we have to get it as a part of the organizational culture that my earlier question was speaking to. A feature of the organizational culture must be a mindset that says we produce, that we're not just consumers of learning, that we are producers of learning. And we must encourage this as an expectation, not just for our children, but for those who stand before our children, those who are at the department even, on all levels. It must become a part of what the second question of the night was when we talked about organizational culture. We must embody that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that response. On to the next question. So, of the senior schools that are to become signature schools, how is it decided which signature school a student goes to if they are unsure of the path they wish to take?
Mr. Brangman, can you just read that again, please?
Yes, certainly. It reads, of the senior schools that are to become signature schools, how is it decided which signature school a student goes to if they are unsure of the path they wish to take?
And thank you to the participant. That is a very significant question, because it's based on, well, what happens if a student is uncertain, about a pathway. What we do know, first of all, is students do have strengths, they do have talents, they do have interests. Our students don't have to be locked in to a particular pathway, but we want to be able to merge or to marry the pathway with students' interests or passions or talents, and students will have an opportunity if a student should need to change to a different pathway. So those sorts of, I guess, structures will be become a part of what is, will be integrated into what is stepped out for the signature schools.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
We understand that sometimes, there are some individuals who know, from the age of 7 what they want to do. And there are others who won't know and won't be certain until, they may be 27. So, how do you do that? You start off by marrying it and connecting it to students' interests, to their gifts, and then providing them, if they would like to, an opportunity to change to a different pathway.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. So the next question we have is, will school closures only happen when the new schools are built, or will there be a transition period?
There will be a transition period, and that's one of the questions we get quite often when we have these discussions. The idea, and Dr. Simmons did touch on it when he said, the minister often says, this is not one of those plans where we turn off the lights on Friday and we come in on Monday and everything is different. This will be, we recognize that this will be a transition from where we are now to where we need to go. How long that transition will be is still something that needs to be designed and something that needs to be put in place once we have the answers to some of the questions, like the consultation we're having tonight. There are still a ways to go before we get to that particular point, but we do recognize, and we can say with certainty, that there will be a transition plan to get us to where we are, to where we want to go, and that transition plan will be over the course of several years.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Mr. Brangman, may I just add to what the minister just said?
Most certainly.
Thank you. Because we often get questions from our participants where they point out that the schools are going to be schools that potentially will be parish schools, will be in place in 2022. And I believe that could be a confusion because of the Plan 2022 strategic plan for the public school system. But I just want to make it clear that in the year 2022, there will be no introduction of school closures or even new primary schools as yet. As the minister said, we have to have a project plan, and we have to map out timelines. That will take a while. So in 2022, the only promise the government has made is the introduction of 2 signature schools. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Secretary, for that clarification. Much
you.
appreciated, and I'm sure the person that asked that question appreciates both of your contributions for that. So the next question that we have is, can we prepare for population increase / private school closures?
I think, go ahead, Commissioner.
Well, Minister, you probably were going to go to page 28, and let me defer to you, Minister. My apologies. You go right
Okay.
ahead.
Well, I almost never turn my little binder I have here from page 28. That is a very good question to ask, and what I want our people to recognize is when we're looking at our particular, looking at our schools and looking at our population projections, what we anticipate that when we get into the final phases and moving to what we're talking about now or what we're proposing, we're looking at schools being around, the majority of our schools being around 75 to 80% full, creating space for if that if that miraculous return to our system, as you said, from the private schools or from, and some people ask, well, what if the population grows? It'll take a very, very long time for our population to get back to the heights it was back in the 80s and 90s in terms of our children. We're looking at the mid 80s when we had double the number of students we had now. And so we're not going to be able to produce that many children very, very quickly moving forward. But that it does take into account when we talk about a 300 person or 300 child limit in our schools, and they're able to hold 300. If you look at page 28 and enrollment projections, there are only 2 parishes that break the 200 student mark. All the rest are all the rest show under 200 students per parish. And so we anticipate that there will be space to grow if we do get all of a sudden a population surge within our public school system.
Thank you very much, Minister. Commissioner, anything further to share? I see a smile on your face.
No, we used the data, and the data plays a key role. The data and the research play a key role in the development of the proposals.
Okay, thank you very much. Also, the next question reads, some of the autism spectrum disorder and functional skills students are capable of going into a general classroom. Can you give me a reason as to why these children are not being integrated in a regular school setting?
I'm glad that I thank the participant for that question, because it's almost implying that we're not going to integrate them. As we consider the vision for learning moving forward and our vision for our children, we will be inclusive. We recognize that we have students who are high functioning, who are, ASD students. Those students will have an opportunity to be in a regular ed classroom and school. So I'm glad that that question was asked so that we can clear that up. Again, there are students who are functional skills students, and I will make the distinction between functional school students who can be in a regular ed setting versus students who may be profoundly challenged and who would be at DAME. So we have not said that the students would not be included in our parish primary school. So I appreciate the participant making that statement, or at least bringing it forward to allow us the opportunity to clear it up.
Yeah, and Commissioner, I think from our last meeting, there was some unanswered questions, and someone reached out to me and said, well, why would you remove inclusion? And I said, that, and of course I responded, that is not our intention. Inclusion will remain within our system.
Absolutely.
We do recognize that we do need a school that has some specialized services, more so than what we're able to provide now, but inclusion will always remain the main goal for all of our students.
Thank you very much, both of you. Answer that question. We're going to answer one more question, and then we're going to go on to the poll. So the question reads, with all the maintenance that needs to take place in order to prepare buildings, will they be ready for 2022?
I believe that question was already answered when the PS talked about this. There is no intention to have any of our schools closed in 2022. The only thing about 2022 that we intend to have in place is the initial 2 signature schools in place in September 2022. It won't be until after those signature schools are in place will the rest of this plan start to be formulated on how that transition will look like moving forward from there.
Okay, thank you, Minister. So at this time, we're going to head on to the poll question. So on your screen, you will see the poll question now. I will read it out. The question is, do you agree with the introduction of parish primary schools with 1 primary school per parish and 2 in Pembroke? So we now give all the participants a moment to answer these questions, or this question rather, and submit your answer. and I will repeat the question one more time. Do you agree with the introduction of parish primary schools, with 1 primary school per parish and 2 in Pembroke? Okay, everyone should be just about finishing submitting their response to that poll. Okay, and we have the results. So I'm going to repeat the question and then read off the percentage of answers. So the question again was, do you agree with the introduction of parish primary schools with 1 primary school per parish and 2 in Pembroke? 67% of you said yes, 8% said no, and 25% are not sure. So I do want to remind all the participants that, especially those that are not sure, that this is the perfect opportunity for you to ask questions to the experts in the field in Bermuda so that you can get clarification and then you can know whether you're sure or not sure. So I urge you to take advantage of this moment to submit your questions, comments, feedback, so that you can all be fully aware of what the government plans with our education, and then you can make a decision. So at this point, we're going to continue on, and I hand this back to the Commissioner of Education to continue the second half of the presentation. Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Brangman. So we're going to move now to part 2 of the presentation, which will zoom in on the proposals for parish primary schools. During this presentation, I'm going to share with you the factors that were used to decide which primary school locations should be refurbished or rebuilt, and then I will drill down to the proposals for parish primary schools. I do want to state up front that I'll work my way through the proposals for each of the parishes, but I will leave the proposal for Pembroke, and I will leave that for last. So I, just want to give you that heads up with reference to that. So I think the first question that many individuals have had is, how did you arrive at the proposed school locations? Well, we had individuals who did research, and then a number of study factors were generated. Those study factors were aligned with the vision for 21st century learning facilities. If you look to the left-hand side of your screen, you will see 4 categories listed: existing building conditions, land/property conditions, safety, health, and then transportation. So they were the overarching categories that were considered. And then I'm going to just highlight for you some of the subcategories that were also considered as study factors. So the age of the school, all of the 18 buildings were factored in. The electrical and plumbing conditions as well. And then the boundary and the zoning restrictions. Were there any restrictions to the boundaries that could impact expansion with those particular sites? And then when we consider the concept of the parish primary school, where the surrounding community will play such a critical role on a day-to-day basis, one of the factors considered the services in each of the parishes where the schools were located. Whether the locations of the schools, as well as their location and proximity to the bus routes, whether there was potential for traffic congestion with an increased number of students and staff that was factored in, safety and accessibility, which are critical. And we used the school report data for that particular study factor. The environmental building conditions were factored in. And then these last 2 study factors, expansion capacity and greenfield size or space, were very critical. Because when we consider the fact that we will add additional curricula and that we would have to have specialized rooms for the delivery of those courses, there is a need for expansion. And so we wanted to, the individuals who were doing the scoring looked at the capacity to expand. And then after this expansion, would there still be enough green space to accommodate the preschool recreation space, the lower primary, upper primary recreation space, and a rigorous outdoor sports program. So these were some of the factors, that were considered when school locations were determined, which ones we would actually propose. And so after the study factors were considered and their scores were tabulated, a proposal was developed to have 10 redesigned, refurbished, or one newly built parish primary school, one primary school per parish, with 2 in Pembroke Parish, and to continue with enrollment by zone. So let's drill down and start looking at our schools by zone. So here's where we are, all of our 18 schools spread across our 9 parishes. Here's what it looks like with our 10 schools spread across the parishes with 2 in Pembroke Parish. And we're going to start at the Western Zone. In the Western Zone in Sands Parish, we currently have West End Primary and Somerset Primary School. Somerset Primary is the proposed parish school because it received the higher score of the 2 schools. It has a larger available acreage, the capacity for development expansion, and the capacity to accommodate 300 students and the additional staff. Somerset Primary also has a large playing field and sufficient outdoor space, and it already has a preschool on site. So we propose Somerset Primary as the parish primary school for Sands, and we propose therefore to close the West End Primary. When we head to Southampton, we have 3 schools. We have Heron Bay, Port Royal, and Delton E. Tucker. Delton E. Tucker is the recommended parish primary school because it received the highest score. However, it also outscored the other 2 primary school sites for land and property. Delton E. Tucker has the acreage for development and the capacity for expansion. The Southampton Free School is adjacent to Delton E. Tucker. And so therefore we propose to have Delton E. Tucker as our parish primary school for Southampton, and we propose to close Port Royal and Heron Bay primaries. Purvis is the only school in its parish, and so we propose to develop Purvis as a parish primary school. So let's move to the Central Zone. So in the Central Zone, let's start with Paget. In Paget, we have Paget Primary and Gilbert Institute. Paget Primary is the recommended parish primary school because Paget Primary scored almost double in the weighted scores for land and property and conditions than Gilbert Institute. And for those of you who are familiar with the Paget Primary site, you would be aware that there's an extensive piece of property behind the school building and school field. And so we propose Paget as the parish primary school for Paget, and therefore we propose to close Gilbert Institute. Now, when we consider Devonshire Parish, we consider Elliott Primary and Prospect Primary. However, the vision for Devonshire is part of a larger vision for education. And so as we look to meet the needs of our children across the island, we're proposing, first of all, for Prospect to actually close and to be repurposed as a school for children with exceptionalities, the signature school for exceptionalities, to serve the children from Dane, but also to serve the individuals, to be a location for the K. Margaret Carter Center, and in time to provide educational support and special ed services for children from across the island. When we consider Elliott, we propose to close Elliott as a primary school and to repurpose it as an alternative education signature school to serve Bermuda's children, and specifically those who may have social emotional needs, who may have behavioral challenges that have to be met, or those who simply want an alternative experience. And in proposing that we close Prospect and Elliott, we also propose a new build for a primary school in Devonshire. So just for clarity, we propose to close Prospect Primary and Elliott Primary, and we propose a new build for a primary school in Devonshire. So we'll come back to Pembroke Parish, and we'll do Pembroke just towards the end of the presentation. So let's move to the Eastern Zone. Harrington Sound and Francis Patton are the only schools in their respective parishes, and we propose to develop them as parish primary schools. In St. George's Parish, we currently have 3 primary schools: East End, St. David's Primary, and St. George's Preparatory. East End Primary is the recommended parish school as it achieved the highest score, especially for land and property. Out of the 3 schools, the East End school location has the highest potential for development, especially as it relates to the vision for learning. And so we propose East End as the parish school for St. George's Parish, and we propose to close St. David's Primary and St. George's Preparatory School. Now let's zoom in on Pembroke Parish. And as we zoom in on Pembroke Parish, we're going to zoom in on 4 key study factors. So presently, Pembroke Parish has 3 public primary schools: Victor Scott, Northlands Primary, and West Pembroke. So we are proposing 2 schools for Pembroke Parish. Victor Scott and the West Pembroke are the recommended schools because they are the 2 schools that receive the highest scores in the areas of existing land area, boundary, green field space, expansion. Ask if you think everyone can mute.
Sorry, Commissioner, if I can ask the person playing music in the background if they can mute their mic. Thank you, much appreciated. I'm sorry, Commissioner, continue.
That's fine, I'll just recap that. Both Victor Scott Primary and West Pembroke Primary were the 2 schools that received the highest scores for existing land area, for boundaries, green field space, and expansion capability. Both schools have large available acreage and land potential for expansion to accommodate up to 300 students and the additional staff. Victor Scott Primary already accommodates a preschool, which is part of our vision to have our preschools attached to or a part of the primary schools. And West Pembroke Primary site has the potential for a preschool. Northlands Primary has land boundary restrictions, limited green space, and limited potential for expansion. We therefore propose Victor Scott Primary and West Pembroke Primary as the parish schools for Pembroke, and we propose to close Northlands Primary. I think one of the things that we want to share with you are the features or the study factors of these proposed school locations. The facilities can be expanded and developed to accommodate the new vision for learning. There's potential to accommodate up to 300 students and the additional staff. And then these locations can also accommodate an on-site preschool. And even with the expansion and development, there would still be sufficient green space for recreational areas and a rigorous outdoor sports program. And we recognize that these proposed changes will impact our students and our staff, and it is a very sensitive matter. Students at schools that are recommended for closures would have to transfer to other schools, and in some instances, students would have to travel further. Staff roles will look differently in the new vision for learning, but the exciting piece is that new roles will be created. And I do want to underscore that the government and the ministry are committed to undertaking a very fair and transparent process on how staff would be assigned to the proposed new structure of education. So, Mr. Brangman, I'm going to turn it back to you so that we can take some more questions and comments from our participants.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I just want to remind the audience participants before we enter into these next questions that you can submit your questions via Zoom, Facebook, or if you wish, you can call in at 478-3301, or you can visit www.menti.com and put in the code 4311452 and submit your questions through that medium as well. So to introduce the second half of the question period, I'm going to ask the participants 2 questions. The first is, do you want to suggest an alternative school as a parish primary school to any of the ones being proposed? And number 2 is, please tell us why it would be a better choice for children's education in that parish.
Mr. Brangman, can I just confirm that this questions on the line, on the slide is just slightly different, if I can read it out? Do you have any comments about the proposal in relation to any particular parish? And for example, the basis for the recommended parish primary schools or any alternatives?
I'm sorry, Commissioner. That was actually just the opening question to get the thoughts and minds of the participants to be engaged and submit their questions toward the whole exercise.
Thank you, Mr.
So I will now move on to the first question that we received for answering. So it reads, will the school strictly adhere to parish boundaries? E.g., I live near the hospital, but I have to attend Paget School, which is almost in Warwick, and tackle the morning traffic. Currently, I can attend West Pembroke School. How would you manage pushback in such instances?
Thank you so much for that question. There are 2 things that we need to keep in mind with enrollment. One is we will continue to enroll by zone. So a parent who, a child who lives in the central zone can apply to a school or be enrolled in a school in the central zone. However, proximity will also be considered as we look at the numbers enrolled for each school.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. So the next question reads, what is the plan moving forward for preschool teachers? Is it for every preschool to be in a primary school building?
Thank you so much for that question. The vision is to have a preschool either attached to the building or on site on the same location as our primary schools. We want to ensure a very seamless transition for our students. And so part of the vision, again, is to have the preschools connected to the building or on the same location or on the same site.
Understood. Thank you, Commissioner. So I just want to remind all the participants, again, we have an expert field here, the best in Bermuda, and they are willing and able to answer your questions. So please do not hesitate to submit your questions, comments, anything, just to be fully informed about the process. So the next question we have is, once problem or project-based learning becomes the norm within elementary schools, transition to the senior schools will become a smooth one?
I believe that was a comment. Was it Mr. Brangman?
I think it was a question asking perhaps once that the problem or project-based learning becomes the norm within elementary schools, will the transition be a smooth one?
That makes sense.
if I think I get the context of it, the assumption of that question that if I understand, is that project-based learning begins in the primary school, and will students be expected to carry it on at the senior level? Project-based learning is across all levels of schooling. So the senior school students will already be engaged in some form of project-based learning.
Thank you very much, Dr. Simmons.
And I want you to keep in mind, we're saying senior schools. Remember, they will be signature schools in 2022. So they already will have an experience of project-based learning.
Thank you. So
Yes, Mr. Brangman, that was the person that sent that in clarified it was a comment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So the next question is, with the proposal for preschools moving into primary schools, where would Prospect Preschool be moved to West Pembroke?
When we consider the central areas, the proposal is to have a new build in Devonshire. And so we would be looking at a preschool becoming a part of that particular site. I hope that helps.
I believe it does. I would like to ask the person that asked the question if they have any further questions related to that, to definitely do not hesitate to submit them. So the next question we have is, how will all of this be funded?
I believe that's a question for myself. The funding for this is a question that comes up quite often. As we have stated on a few occasions, we are in the process of doing the consultation to get to a point where we can make the decisions on what the system will ultimately look like. Once we are finally able to make those decisions, and that will govern whether we close schools or not close schools, which what signatures will be at various schools as such. And so while that plan is still being formulated, it is not really possible for us to come up with a financial cost at this particular time. Once we get to that point, and then we start looking at, as we've been talking about, the transition plan and the blueprint of what needs to happen to the various schools. And the transition plan will also talk about which schools get developed, what schools could be developed more quickly than other schools, and they'll go in and they'll be developed in some sort of synchronization. So it won't be, we're working on 10 different schools at the same time, because that is just not feasible. So once we get to that point, we'll be able to talk about what type of finances will be needed in order to do that. But I also want to say, rest assured that the government has committed to the financing that needs to happen for this. And we've already started looking at alternative financing options for moving this forward, such things as PPP, or private-public partnerships, to produce our buildings. We've looked at other financing models as well, as we just started to look at them, but we can't take it really any further than what we've talked about until we actually know what that plan is going to be.
Thank you, Minister, and it definitely makes total sense. Next question reads, what is the timeline for these proposed changes?
Again, another question that comes up quite frequently, and it's probably came up, I think this would be about the third or fourth time it's come up in this particular session as well. The only concrete timeline we have is that we plan to have 2 signature schools operational by September 2022. That being said, everything else that we're talking about will happen after that date, or start to happen after that date. And we don't anticipate that happening until several years, the transition plan taking several years to come to fruition. And I think I do want to repeat, because it was actually, it came up earlier, where will this be done by, how can we do all of this by the year 2022? And that year 2022 is very important because our strategic plan is called Plan 2022. And so some people take that to mean that in 2022, all of the things that we're talking about will come to fruition, but that is not the case. Plan 2022 was a 5-year plan that was launched, was a 5-year strategic plan that was launched in 2018. And the idea is that within 5 years, most of those things, because some of those things were short-term, some of them were mid-term, and some of them were long-term. The stuff that we're talking about now is part of the long-term vision. And it wasn't that it would be completed by 2022. The vision was that we would be well on the way to getting towards that before, as we reach the year 2022. So I hope that clarifies just a little bit of that. Most of the short-term things have been completed, if not all. The midterms are in process, and now we're into talking about what the long-term goals are and getting them in train so those can progress.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I have a clarification from a question that was asked earlier. The person just clarified it for us. So the question reads, if Prospect Preschool is to be the parish preschool for Devonshire, where would Devonshire Preschool be placed?
I think that's an excellent question. What we have now are 10 preschools, ironically, and we plan to have 10, and the proposal is 10 primary schools. And so all 10 of our preschools will find a home within one of those primary schools. We just don't know. We can't say which ones at this point. And that is unique with Devonshire having 2 of them. I believe that's the only parish that has 2. But when we look at Smith Parish, it doesn't have a preschool. And so, so there are all sorts of possibilities that there. But that part of it hasn't been worked out. But I do appreciate that suggestion and that query, because that is something we will have to take into account.
Thank you, Minister. So moving on to the next question. How many students is the proposal looking to have in the preschools?
As stepped out in the consultation document, the proposal is to have 30 students.
Okay, thank you for that, Commissioner. I'd like to thank again the participants for submitting your questions. And I'll remind you as well, you can continue to submit them. You can call in to CITV at 478, that's 478-3301, or you can visit Menti at www.menti.com, and the code for that is 4311452. So on to the next question. Have you thought of having separate bus transportation for schools outside of the public bus service to eliminate shutdowns in service?
Thank you so much for that question. And yes, we have. Not just it's for us, it's not about the shutdown in service. It's about getting children to school on time so that they don't miss out on any learning in the morning. It's about the vision for having an extended school day so that we can have our children arrive home safely. And it's also about having our children go outside of the gates of the walls of the classroom so that they can apply their learning. So we have absolutely considered that. Part of the vision is to have, buses for the system that will take children to and from school and take them outside to experience various things across the island.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. So I have another question just coming to me regarding the teachers. So what will happen with our teachers? Will they be moved along or lose their jobs?
Thank you so much for that question as well. I would go back to what I shared just after I talked about the various locations that we are committed to stepping out a process that will enable us to determine the placement of our staff. That process will provide opportunities for school leaders and school staff to have input in terms of what that process will look like to determine the placement. And I really would encourage our educators and our leaders to take advantage of the opportunity when the call comes for their input.
Thank you, Commissioner. So another question we have is, will there be a new curriculum? Will there be a new curriculum?
As we currently are engaged in this process, actually there's a committee of folk right now reconceptualizing, rethinking, redesigning ideas about what a new curricula could look like. Again, if you remember, I take you right back to the vision for learning. One of the key competencies or features of that vision for learning is a culturally relevant curriculum, culturally relevant teaching. So when you ask if there's going to be a new curricula, there are discussions right now to engage teachers, teams of people, public, in terms of what a redesigned new curricula could look like that is culturally relevant.
Thank you, Dr. Simmons. So next question we have is, what will happen to school legacy and history?
I think that one always seems to fall to me. As I spoke in my opening comments, school history and legacy is critically important, and we have to come up with a method of recording this. And this seems to dominate a lot of the conversations that we do have around this. And what I do want to encourage people to recognize is that legacy lives with the people who are able to tell the stories and have those experiences. It doesn't reside solely within the buildings that it resides in. We hear that so often, and the question I ask, and the question I tend to pose back at the person was, if I wanted to research the history of Eliot, where do I go? Where can I find that information? If I want to research the history of Prospect Primary, or Northland or West Pembroke, where do I go to find that? We have to recognize that we have not done a very good job of recording our historical legacy here in Bermuda, especially when it comes to our institutions, and to be quite frankly, some of our Black institutions, especially our public primary schools. We have to solve that problem, and that's got to be part of what we're talking about now. So we can record that, so we can make sure that that is preserved for history as we move along. One of the questions I had early this week is, what if there was a horrible disaster and a school burned to the ground and we decided not to build it again? Does the history die at that point? No, the history will not die at that point. But the simple fact that we haven't recorded it, written it down, and made it accessible for all to see is the reason why history dies, not because buildings disappear. And that is what we need to be really honest about. And that's what we need to do with part of what it is that we're talking about. So our students and our future generations can look back and see what happened prior to where we've come from, to where we have been, to where we've come from. I take a look at schools like the Berkeley Institute that's moved to 4 different locations. Their history is preserved. It doesn't matter what building they're in, you can go and find out how Berkeley became to be Berkeley and how it has progressed through the years. That is probably one of the few schools outside of our private schools that have done that. And we ought to be really asking ourselves, how can we accomplish that for our schools and to continue our legacy?
Thank you very much, Minister. And Berkeley was a perfect example in answering that question. So the next question reads, will students in classes from the closed school remain in their same class when moved to the new school?
I just want to say that will all be part of the transition plan and the types of things that will have to be figured out. I mean, even just asking these questions should really dawn on everyone what a massive task this will be and how it will not be something that is accomplished overnight. These are all really real and truthful things that will have to be taken into account before we can even begin that move from where we are to where we want to be. But I thank you for that question because I believe that's the first time we've heard that one. And this is the purpose of having these open and honest dialogues and consultation meetings we're having now, because we get to hear those types of things that someone may not have picked up on as we move on. But that's the information we need so we can make better decisions moving forward for our children. Thanks, Mike.
And Minister, if I can just add a bit there, we would encourage the individual who asks that question to take some time just to send in a bit of information around that and to propose what he or she thinks that could possibly look like. So we welcome that as well.
Thank you, Commissioner and Minister, for that. And I want to just build on your sentiments about it, and that, you know, while the team that we have here are experts in this field, nobody knows everything. And so it is incumbent upon the community to give your feedback, suggestions, to bring up ideas that we may not have thought of. And so I urge everyone again to submit your questions, comments, just to help build on this discussion and let us all, you know, think outside the box to figure out solutions that would help benefit our children long term. So the next question we have is, currently the preschool curriculum is the creative curriculum. Will it continue to be used with the redesign?
The answer is yes.
All right, short and succinct. The next one is, what will the assessment look like that will facilitate a transition from elementary school to the appropriate senior signature school?
Does anyone want to? I know my 2 bits on that is we haven't decided on how that assessment will look like, but the idea of our school reform is that within those last 2 years of our primary school, our students are exposed to all types of potential vocations, and which will help to guide them to figure out what particular signature school they that caters to what it is that they're interested in. As the commissioner mentioned earlier, this doesn't mean that you're stuck at the particular signature school that you originally went to. And I know previously, I mean, we talked about all sorts of exciting things. And what if there's a, you know, when we're talking about these signature schools, and we're talking about the ability to do internships, to do apprenticeships, to get international certifications in our various things that you want to explore on top of going to school. And what if something that you're interested in is offered at another school? In this, when we talk about this 21st century learning, it could be very well a way that you're at one school and be able to remote in to another school's class and sit in there without having to switch physical locations. So when we talk about 21st century learning, we talk about a different type of learning than what all of us in this room have experienced. And so when we are talking about education reform, in some ways, while we do reflect on our personal experiences within our school system, we have to in some ways literally put it to the side and open our mind and see that there could be something completely, totally different that we hadn't even thought of before or haven't even seen before to make this work. The idea of education reform is to create an equitable school system that meets our children where they are and gives them every opportunity to succeed. Not one size fits all type of model that we've known for years to operate within our system, but a system that is flexible enough for any child to come and thrive to the best of their ability.
And if I can add, I think if the question is drilling down a bit more in terms of what's the entry requirements for the signature level, what, will students require in order to make the transition? We recognize that that is a factor that we have to consider. That will be a part of the plan. And so, that has already been identified as a factor that we have to step out very clearly.
Okay, thank you, Minister and Commissioner, for your excellent answers. On to the next question. It reads, what will happen to the proposed school buildings?
Permanent Secretary?
Okay. If I understand the question correctly, what will happen to the proposed
school buildings?
Okay, so the school buildings do not belong to the Ministry of Education. The school buildings belong to the Ministry of Public Works. And so therefore, if there are any school closures as it relates to public education, then the buildings will be, or the future of the buildings will be in the hands of the Ministry of Public Works. A classic example, when the Minister of Education made the decision to close the T.N. Tatum Middle School. And so once that decision was made, the Minister of Public Works then utilized the building for various different purposes. If persons actually visit there now, they're for various different purposes in the community. And so the Minister of Public Works will make that decision. But I'm pretty sure if there are any school closures, the buildings will be used wisely. And I'm sure the general public will have some input in terms of what could possibly be in the buildings.
Thank you, Permanent Secretary. Thank you very much for that response, Permanent Secretary. I just want to inform everyone that we're going to answer 3 more questions, but also remind you that Menti will remain open for 24 hours. So that is until 9 p.m. tomorrow night. So you can still submit your questions and they will all be addressed. So the next question is, while integration is a desire of the Bermuda public school system, will parents have the option to move their child to an alternative school for more specialized learning?
Thank you so much for that question. And the proposed structure will create additional options for parents. For example, when we consider the 5 signature schools, there may be parents who say, I want an alternative. I want to have my child to have a different experience. And so that parent can have the alternative signature school. Their child can have the alternative signature school as an option. So yes, there will be options.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next question reads, will parents have school choice? What if they don't want their child to go to the school in their parish?
As shared earlier, parents will be able to register by zone. And so again, we also have to consider proximity as well. And so parents will have a few options in their zone.
Thank you, Commissioner. And so the last question is, will there be a foundation year between preschool and primary school?
Dr. Simmons?
Yes.
Oh man, a few words I spared at times, right, Dr. Simmons?
If the question is a direct question, it's a yes or no answer.
Definitely. All right.
I can easily elaborate, but it's yes.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Simmons. So we're going to move now on to our poll question.
Just let me, Mr. Brangman, make a few comments, some reflections for those who are online as we consider what is needed for our children and wanted to give them the very best. What we are proposing and putting on the table is a change. It really is a national matter that impacts every household, every business, and everyone in Bermuda. And so if we don't make the change, then we really aren't addressing the long-standing national issues about education. Our children won't get the high quality educational experience that they need and deserve. And it's really, when we think about it, it's too high a price to pay for our young people if we don't make the much needed change.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner, for elaborating on that.
Yeah.
And I will now speak about the consultation process just prior to moving on to the poll. So we want to remind everyone to please participate by sharing your views. Each and every consultation response, including alternatives, will be reviewed, considered, and analyzed. And we will share the results of the consultation with you.
Mr. Brangman, before we go to the poll, I would like to emphasize, so that there is absolute clarity for our participants this evening in terms of the process, in terms of where we are now, the Ministry of Education. We're in the months of February moving into March, and during that time, we will continue to have our consultation meetings, and these meetings will stand until March the 8th. What's next after that? You actually went through that, and the slide is up now. Between April and May, we will review, the minister will continue to review, and he will consider every single consultation response, every submission, any alternatives. He will review in detail, and we will make sure that he reviews them so that he makes an informed decision. And so he will communicate his decision before the end of the school year. And we will ensure that he releases a decision report so that the general public can see what submissions were actually sent in, and they can read for themselves. So I just want this to be clear for our listening participants. Now, when will parish schools be introduced? I think this is important as well. No decision has been made as yet. So we get through this consultation process during February and March. The minister makes his decision. If the decision is parish primary schools, then it's important to understand there will be a phased introduction approach of parish primary schools. And this phased introduction or rollout will take place after September 2022. And it's critical to understand that the phased approach or the rollout will take at least 3 to 5 years. So all the questions that have been asked this evening about transition, excellent questions. We're thinking about that. Not only are our participants thinking about it, but they're making sure they bring it to our attention, and that is excellent. But that's going to take some time. So it's going to 3 to 5 years after September 2022 for the rollout, or the beginning of a rollout of an introductory parish primary school. And we want to make sure that we do this with excellence. And what will happen in September 2022? That 2022 year is a year that is in the forefront of everyone's mind. Just the introduction of 2 signature schools. That's what the government's committed to, and that's what's going to happen in September 2022. So everything else in terms of the introduction of potential primary schools will take 3 to 5 years rolling out after that. Thank you. Hopefully that clarifies and paints a good picture for our listening participants.
Yes, I'm sure it does, and thank you very much for that very thorough breakdown of the process. Much appreciated, Permanent Secretary. So we will now move on to the poll question. And I will read out the questions. There are 2 of them. The first one is, were there enough opportunities to share views and ask questions during this meeting? And the second is, how would you rate this meeting? So the option to answer should be on your screen momentarily. And once it pops up, you would have some time to submit your responses. Okay, I'm going to read out the two questions one more time. Were there enough opportunities to share views and ask questions during this meeting? And how would you rate this meeting?
Mike, I haven't seen the poll pop up yet.
Oh, there we go, just popped up. All right, so I'll give everyone some more time to review the questions. I'll read them out again. The first is, were there enough opportunities to share views and ask questions during this meeting? And number two, how would you rate this meeting? Okay, all the answers should be submitted just about now. And in a moment, I'll read the results. Okay, and here we go. So the results for the first question, were there enough opportunities to share views and ask questions during this meeting? 100% of you said yes. And number two, how would you rate this meeting? 42% said excellent and 58% said good. I thank all of you participants for submitting your poll results, your questions, much appreciated. So at this time, I would hand it back over to the Minister of Education for his wrapping up. Minister? You on mute, Minister?
Thank you. Was I muted just now?
Yes.
Excuse me, my daughter came in, so I muted because she was scuttling around. I just want to say thank you to everyone for participating. Thank you, Mr. Brangman, for being our moderator. Thank you, Commissioner Richards. Thank you, Permanent Secretary, and thank you, Dr. Simmons. But most of all, thank you, parents and whoever else participated in the meeting. Your questions were very, very topical. The questions were very, very enlightening and very good. And and rest assured, every single question that was posed, even the ones that we might not have gotten to or may pick up later, will be looked at and analyzed and be part of our final decision. The Mentee website will remain open for 24 more hours. So in case you come up with something else, please record that log-on information so you could go to there and put in alternative questions. Additionally, you can send in alternatives or questions or feedback to consultation@moed.bm, or you can go to the moed.bm website and use the feedback form, which is the way we do prefer you to send those documents in. What I do want to leave you with is a few days ago, the commissioner mentioned to myself and the permanent secretary about an infographic and about detailing very critical information about the processes that we're talking about. When I was reading through the consultation document today, and I came across page 25. Page 25, I urge every single person to, if you don't look at anything else in the consultation document, please look at page 25. What page 25 shows you is the current state of our schools and what we would like the future state to look like. This gives you a really, really good picture because it takes all of the categories that we find important, lists what they are now, and then also shows you what they can be. So sometimes some of the questions that we're talking about now are actually right there. So when I look at this very quickly, it says teacher-student ratio, current state between 1 and 16 and 1 and 25, future state 1 and 15. And so it actually does talk about that. Another question that came up had to do with transportation, and it has done our transportation, current state public buses, future state dedicated school buses for our education system. You know, a question that came up before, current state external services for OT, PT, ST, and from future state in-house services for those types of things. So I do encourage you to, if you don't look at anything else, look at page 25, and it has a wealth of information that can kind of summarize almost the entire document one time. But with that, I just want to bid everyone good evening. Thank you for coming out. God bless. Please stay safe. If you want to tune into any of our other meetings, you can come. We welcome everyone. You may have another question that comes up. Our next meeting is Monday. I believe we have one every day next week, except Friday. Yes, we have 4 next week except Friday, and they are for individual parishes. But anybody is welcome to come and ask any questions you want. So with that, thank you and good night, everybody. And thank you again for coming out.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Hey, good night, all. Thank you very much.
Took me around to introduce me in that station. There were 3 people that quit. There was a person that spat on the floor in front of me. And I had to make up my mind how I was going to handle this. I was taken into the locker room and I was given a locker. And I was told, you can put your things in here. And the program director said, look, I'm sorry about all of this. And he left.